Welcome to another session of #LDeduchat, Leadership Development in Education Online. Today we have a fantastic session, a really poignant session in terms of the things that we need to look at within our schools to embed the culture and the ethos that we need to exemplify the 3 I's. The 3 I's being the intent, the implementation, and the impact of our curriculums in our school on the new framework. So we've got a wonderful presentation from Stuart Lock today. Over on Twitter today, as always, we have another Twitter takeover at Chiltern TSA. If you do use Twitter, we are very active on there. Do go on there and continue the conversation. We encourage you, especially at a time that things are starting to open up a little bit more. Not everybody can attend the live sessions. If you find a session that's particularly useful to you or that you think will be of interest to another colleague, make sure you share that. So without further ado, let's jump straight into Stuart's presentation.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Stuart Lock. I'm CEO of Advantage Schools, a really small multi-academy trust in Bedford. We run primary and secondary schools. We take a curricular focus, and I'm really pleased to be here presenting today. I'm really grateful to have been asked. It's been phenomenal to see the support of schools and trusts up and down the country sharing learning for pupils, learning for teachers, support staff, and for leaders throughout the lockdown period, and long may that collaborative effort continue. I've been asked today to talk about the 3 I's, what we have learned from our inspections so far. The subheading that I've been asked to speak about is how can we ensure that our curriculum meets the needs of the National Curriculum Framework, our school, our community and students. A big topic. I think I'm going to need to get on with it because I've been given about half an hour, and I reckon that I could ordinarily speak for something like 2 to 3 hours about this and go on for quite some time. One of the reasons I think I was asked to speak on this topic is because we were fortunate enough, since the new framework came into being in September 2019, to have had 2 Ofsted inspections, both in January of 2020, one in our primary school, Elstow School, and one in our secondary school, Bedford Free School. And both of them went relatively well. I'm going to try to weave in our narrative about our curricular development over some significant time in our trust and try to explain how that manifested itself in our Ofsted inspections. Hopefully not giving you the impression that we've done anything for Ofsted, because my opening point really is that throughout my leadership of the schools that we run, I have always said that we don't do anything for Ofsted. Ofsted will take care of itself, and I hope that you'll hear that a lot from me throughout this presentation. What we do is we do expect very good outcomes from our pupils. We expect the curriculum to be world class. We expect it to be world class for everybody, and I'm going to talk about that as well. The 3 I's, what have we learned from inspections so far? Because we don't talk of Ofsted itself, I've really struggled over the 3 I's, particularly the first one. The 3 I's are intent, implementation and impact, and they're the method by which Ofsted will measure the curriculum of a school that it comes to judge. My problem with that is that I've always tried to avoid Ofsted words. We don't grade our teachers or our schools outstanding. We try and avoid that kind of language. We certainly don't use the phrase requires improvement, and we've always tried to avoid things that sound like they've come from the Ofsted handbook, because if we were to use the Ofsted language, it kind of indicates that we're doing things to be performative, to perform for Ofsted, rather than to go back to the kind of purpose that we exist. My problem with that is that, like, I kind of reject the premise of the entire presentation, in that, like, I'm not really that bothered about what we've learned from inspections, but I think it's a useful way into talking about curriculum and how we can run a great curriculum. And my problem here is that the first I, intent, the curriculum intent, I think is a really important thing for us to get right. And I can't think of a better phrase for what you intend for pupils to learn. The curriculum intent, after months of soul searching about what can we call this, we've ended up just using the language and then perhaps overstating that we don't do that for Ofsted. We think that it's really important to have a curriculum intent, and we've had that for a great many years. I'm just going to skip to the end of our 2 Ofsted inspections in January of 2020. They were 1 week after another. There was a Section 8 inspection at Elstow. That's one where they say basically, are you still good or not? And if you're not good at the next inspection, you might get downgraded or upgraded. And at Elstow School, it continued to be good. And at Bedford Free School, we had a Section 5 inspection. The Section 5 inspection means that all the grades are in play. We did achieve an outstanding judgment in every area, but it wasn't without a significant fight, both during the inspection and, interestingly, after the inspection, because originally the quality of education was good, and after a complaint, which is a little bit complicated, and I might explain if you wanted to ask a question about it. We put in a complaint about the inspection. On review, it was upgraded to outstanding on review of the evidence that was there, and I'm happy to talk about that if you wish me to, but I don't have any particular insights. I also want to give you a disclaimer. I'm not an Ofsted expert. I'm not an Ofsted inspector. If you want to know about how Ofsted grade schools, I think that the Ofsted material that they put out very openly and very transparently is probably the best resource you can use. I don't think that I can add more to what Ofsted put out themselves about what they expect to see in their inspections. And so all I'm going to do is talk to you about our approach to running our schools and how that came across with Ofsted, particularly around the key area of curriculum that's been such a focus since September of 2019. I hesitate to use the phrase our vision because I think sometimes leaders can retreat into talking about nebulous things like vision and values at the expense of the nitty-gritty detail of how to run a great school. And I don't like to get bogged down in that stuff. But I think our vision on the curriculum is really important. And I talk about this quite a lot to our staff and to our community. And the reason it's important is because I think that different schools run themselves for different purposes. As I think is documented throughout kind of social media and particularly on Twitter, people have different aims and different purposes about education. For many people, it's about getting a good job. I suggest that many parents even would align themselves with that aim. For some, it's about providing good, compliant workers for the workforce. Others, it's about making sure that we set pupils up for a happy life. For many, it's about understanding the place that they're in. There's a wide variety of purposes. I think particularly when we talk about our curriculum, we talk about wanting our pupils to join the community of educated citizens. That means that we want them to have the knowledge that is shared by those that are members of the community of educated citizens, that knowledge that we just take for granted. And we think that's really important. It flows through everything we do, because if pupils haven't joined that community, if they haven't assimilated that knowledge that educated people take for granted, by the age of about 16, 17, 18, they're probably going to be excluded from that community for life. A good way of putting it, and Daisy Christodoulou does this in her first book, is if you think about the Guardian headline, NATO in Libya, catch-22. And if you think about that headline, you think about you and I, and I hope everybody watching this webcast will understand what that headline means. You'll have a good idea of what is in that article. Our pupils at age 11 probably don't. And the difference between us and them is that the literary, historical, geographical, political, and other knowledge that is floating around, I know what Catch-22 is about, even though I haven't actually read the novel, but floating around in our brains from that we've been educated into, because we take that for granted, we're able to apply that to that headline and able to get a good idea of what the article is about. And of course, young people can't, and they, in my opinion, they have the right to join that community of educated citizens by the time they are older. Or another way of putting it is that if you're in a chemistry laboratory, you can put me in a chemistry laboratory and tell me that I'm free to do as I like, but I can't do anything, But if you induct me into the discipline of chemistry, if you teach me about the traditions, about the knowledge that's been handed down, I can not only participate and do incredible things in that chemistry laboratory, but I could also join that conversation that's gone on. I can further that conversation. I can even undermine or challenge that conversation. And if that's the case for a chemistry laboratory, I think it's the case as well for democracy, that we have to induct pupils to join a community of educated citizens in order to allow them to have their say in a democracy. And heavens, in the time we are now, don't we need that? So for us, curriculum's at the front and centre of everything we do. That isn't because it's been in the Ofsted framework and was mooted to be in the Ofsted framework for some time. It's because back in 2015, for example, I wrote a long blog and I presented at the Festival of Education saying pedagogy is overrated. What I was arguing is that curricular thought has been absent from schools for many, many years. And I'm a big fan of Ofsted having brought that back. I don't think we should do it for Ofsted, but I'm pleased it's happening and that audiences want to hear about what some of the best curricular thinkers are doing, how we lead on curriculum in our schools. So curriculum is front and centre with everything we do. And the third thing I want to say, or maybe it's not the third thing, maybe it's about the seventh thing about this slide, is that phrase, the word all. We do mean all. Inclusion for me means joining the community of educated citizens. Exclusion for me means when those pupils are excluded from that community for life. And for me, that means we have to take very seriously where our most challenged, our most vulnerable, and our most disadvantaged pupils may have problems or may find it difficult to join that community and assimilate that knowledge and those experiences that allow them to join that community. But we cannot lower the bar because the price of entry to that community won't lower for them. So we must increase the support, but not lower the bar. And that's one of the ways in which we try to run our schools. I should say the BFS Ofsted we asked for it because we thought we were an outstanding school and we wanted to show it. And the reason we asked for the Ofsted, although we didn't plan for Ofsted particularly, is because we felt like the Ofsted framework had caught up with our school. We have been talking and thinking about curriculum since at least 2017 when I joined Bedford Free School, then as principal. We certainly have been thinking about it before then, but perhaps not in the kind of subject specific manner that I will try to describe to you. As a result of that, we felt like we were in a good position for Ofsted, and so we went for it. We didn't have any transitory arrangements. I don't know if you're familiar that Ofsted give schools kind of a bit of a free pass if they're developing their curriculum and they take into account that it's going to be developed over the next couple of years and it might not be the finished article. We were claiming, in fact, I never claim curriculum as a finished article, but we were claiming that our curriculum was good enough to get it outstanding according to the Ofsted handbook as it is. The 5 kind of things we needed people to know, and I mean leaders in our schools to know, is that we wanted them to know the handbook that I wrote, which is basically make sure we know our curriculum inside out. We need to know about our procedures and any questions we're anticipating, particularly around curriculum, that inspectors might ask. We need to know the Ofsted handbook, know our self-evaluation form, and know the information about our schools. We need to know which pupils are learning and which aren't and what we're doing about it. We need to have systems to be able to do that, and I will try to describe that to you. I should say, if we go back a slide to our vision on curriculum, that's basically our curricular intent. As you probably can pick up, from that wanting our pupils to join a community of educated citizens flows the intent that our pupils have a curriculum that is filled full of knowledge, that is subject specific, it's academic subjects that we focus on, and that we want everybody to be entitled to gather, to be inducted into those academic subjects, regardless of their background. Our trust works on this premise, and this is what we expect our schools to share. Some trusts call them non-negotiables. We call them shared expectations. We have very high expectations of our pupils, particularly that we expect pupils to do well in exams, but we don't expect to see cramming for exams. We believe that our curriculum will lead to good outcomes. And a good friend of mine visited Bedford Free School a while ago, and he sent me a book. The book was by the San Francisco 49ers head coach, and it was called "The School Will Take Care of Itself." And he said that the school reminded him of that we didn't focus on the outcomes so much as we made sure that there was very high quality curriculum in place and that the pupils learnt it and remembered it. And then we said the exams will take care of themselves. And so he sent me that, I think, because he said it reminded him of our school. We do expect our leaders to sweat the small stuff. We absolutely believe that our leaders should be responsible for behaviour. We think that conduct, behaviour, culture should be impeccable in our schools. And if it isn't, then we expect our leaders to make it impeccable and to take responsibility for it being so. There's no point in having a great curriculum and great curricular thought without good behaviour. But I know there's been a number of Chiltern Learning Trust videos and sessions that are focused on that. And we expect people to do their job well. And we value people that do their job well. People that do their job well are the people we want to keep in our organisation, and we want to recruit people that do their job well. And although that seems like an obvious thing to say, I think making it a very clear expectation makes it clear that we want people to work hard and achieve well. I should say that as we focus on curriculum, we're really explicit about opportunity cost. I don't think we can make sure that our curriculum meets the needs of our vision, of our intent, unless we prioritise it. And when I say prioritise it, it's important, I think, for leaders not to say, you've got this to do as well now, but to focus on what we're not prioritising, what we don't think is so important. And for us, that means we don't have anything on particular marking policies. In fact, in our secondary school, we have no marking of ordinary classwork at all because we focus on the content of the curriculum. We do have feedback, but we don't have anyone ticking books and so on. And that's largely the case in our primary as well. We don't focus very much on generic pedagogy. We don't have a particular lesson plan. We don't have formal lesson observations with lesson observation proformas. We don't have mock deep dives or mock Ofsteds in any way whatsoever. We focus on curricular thought, and that is the most important thing that makes a difference to pupils and their achievement. And so we're developing our curriculum, which we don't think is ever done, is absolutely our focus beyond anything else. I don't think we could have got through our Ofsted if curriculum had been the priority it was, but we'd said everything that teachers do or did in our school prior to making curriculum a priority, they still have to do. If teachers had to run their own sanctions or detentions, had to write very long reports, had to, all those things that could be super important and would be what I phrase as bets that other school leaders might take, they're bets we deprioritised in favour of our curricular bet. Everything for us is about curriculum. And so when we call it a priority, we really mean it's a priority. And as I've said already, we worked on this for a long time before the Ofsted framework changed. We believe curriculum is key to transforming and improving young people's lives. As such, we know we were ahead in the journey in curriculum development, and we're in a strong position to move forward. You'll be familiar of the metaphor of using the curriculum being like a roadmap, and one that we follow. We're less sure about that and think it might be more complex. So the metaphor we borrow from Christine Council is that the curriculum is more like the waterways of Venice. It needs specialist maintenance, or it won't take you where you want to go, and it won't be a rewarding experience. The waters don't stand alone. The canals are interconnected in the way learning is often interconnected, with each one serving one another in ways that are difficult to measure, and all feed into and draw upon the larger oceans of subject disciplines. And just as how Venice needs a huge amount of maintenance to maintain, a great curriculum needs constant review, nurture, and curation, not just the individual areas, but the whole collective. So in our schools, we have leaders who understand this and take great professional pride in doing so. This work has meant we have a clear and coherent vision for curriculum, which I hope you've heard across the Trust, and a lot of work goes into making that vision a reality for the children in our schools. We think implementation of the curriculum is as important as having a great vision. In fact, it's far more important, and implementation is often the thing we miss out on. We have detailed curriculum maps specifying what we expect children to learn, and our quality curricular resources ensure learning builds upon and links back to prior learning. And I'm going to talk about our assessment model later on because I think that's really important, but assessment systems treat the curriculum as the progression model and measure how much has been maintained or retained in memory over the long term, rather than how much the pupils can perform at the end of a lesson. We just don't think you can see learning in 20 minutes or an hour or even in a week or whatever it might be. I'm going to talk to you a bit more about that as well. So when I say that we prioritise curriculum, this, for example, is our professional learning in our trust over the last year and what we've done over the last year. It will hopefully come as no surprise to you that almost all of that feeds back into the curriculum and how we deliver it. And the reason that that's important is I want to point out that when I talk about opportunity cost, we cancelled in our secondary school all of our after school meetings, and we only put on professional learning once a week. And in fact, even then, when we had a parents' evening, we didn't put it on at all. So professional learning once a week. Every fortnight it would be for school, for the senior leaders, and every fortnight for the teachers. This was our priority, really, really important. Our Ofsted report comments on this. The quality of the training is what's needed to achieve ambitious curriculum goals, and ambitious curriculum needs well-trained staff. So the understanding of the curriculum materials and cognitive science to help pupils learn is what we needed for our teachers. It's important for us that all of our pupils get a great deal, and hence our training has focused on the things that are on their school culture, curriculum, cognitive science, and crucially our subjects. And the focus on the subjects is the most difficult thing to get. How can I, as a trained maths teacher, understand what it is we need to develop in a curriculum that's much more cumulative, English literature, for example, arguably history, than it is in mathematics, particularly with my lack of subject knowledge in those disciplines? And of course, that's really, really difficult to do, but it's got to be our focus. And we came to the conclusion actually quite quickly that senior leaders couldn't do that generically. We just had to know more about individual subjects. And the challenge for senior leaders is to get to know as much as possible about 3 or 4 subjects that they line manage. But the focus has been on subjects as soon as the foundations are in place. In our primary school, I think it's worth saying there that means that the subject leaders, the teachers who take on curricular responsibilities while being classroom teachers, so the year 1 teacher who is responsible for history from early years to year 6, needs to understand how the curriculum is the progression model, how year 6 history builds on what they learnt in year 1 or year 2, and how that sequences through. Needs to understand that and needs to know that. And our professional learning sessions in our primary school focused on the leader for history explaining the curriculum, explaining the developments in the curriculum to all of the staff. So the year 4 teacher didn't just know that they were teaching, year 4 history, but knew how it linked to what the pupils are learning all the way through their journey through school. And of course, that's crucially important in mathematics. It's an incredibly hierarchical subject. There are all sorts of things you can't do in mathematics unless you have the kind of foundations. And so, but it's also crucial, I think, for all of our teachers to understand what they're doing fits on the curricular journey, because then the curriculum becomes the pedagogy. It becomes the nature of teaching. It becomes what you're teaching in the classroom, dictates how you teach it, and allows you to respond to 30 pupils all at different places, all understanding different aspects of what's being taught. It allows you to respond with agility because you have an understanding of the curriculum. That's really challenging, but that's what we expect to focus on as our priority. And I think people have learned that if you tell me you're focusing on curriculum and can talk about it with integrity, with fidelity, and with intelligence, actually, I'm probably not going to ask you to do much else, because that's the thing I really want us to continually develop. This is what schools do anyway. We're just trying to make sure that it's the absolute focus and we put in the maximum amount of expertise. And when we talk about the implementation of the curriculum, it's just teaching. It's just making sure that the pupils remember what we intend them to remember. I don't think there's a big long document that we can write for Ofsted for this. It's that when teachers are asked, the year 1 lead in history was asked, they did a deep dive at Elstow School, was asked about history, and she was able to talk about history because she talked to the whole school about it. She hadn't talked to the whole school about it because we were preparing for Ofsted. She talked to the whole school about it because it makes history teaching better. And that's the crucial thing. That's why we felt like we were ahead of the curve in our schools in terms of how we were prepared for Ofsted, why we were in a strong position when the inspection came round. I should repeat here that the curriculum is in a constant process of review, that we don't think it's ever done. This isn't a view that's, I think, as widespread as I'd like it to be. I think there is a view, and I do understand this, that curriculum is really hard, that curricular thinkers are, like, it's hard to find good curricular thinkers, and our Director of Education, Sally Stanton, is one of them. I think a few years ago, you could probably count on the fingers of two hands how many great curricular thinkers there were in the UK that were well known. And so I get the idea that get somebody else to write the curriculum and then teachers deliver it because that's what they're good at. I just think it's not separate like that. I think that the curriculum leads to pedagogy. The curriculum is the driver. If you know well enough what you're teaching, actually how you teach it becomes really obvious depending on what the discipline is. I want to focus on QA, our quality assurance, because it's really hard for school leaders to know that the 12, 13, 14 different subjects that you do in your school are all of high quality. I'm a maths teacher and I don't believe I can walk into a maths classroom and know how good it is, even from a lesson. And so that's really tough to get to understand. We have never done a mock deep dive. The deep dive, I think, is probably a very good method of trying to get under the skin, to probe into the quality of a curriculum if you're doing a 2-day inspection. It's not necessary in schools where curriculum is central to the systems and leaders are immersed in the life of the school and its educational focus. So we have used Ofsted's research documents to inform our QA systems, basically because they're really good. And so the Ofsted research that went into the framework, I think it's unprecedented the amount of research and consultation they did on it. And I think it's really a really very, very good system and very, very helpful for us. There are also curriculum development conversations. We spend a lot of time unpicking what progress looks like across years, and it never looks like numbers. It never looks like going from a 4 to a 5, from a 5 to a 6, from a GCSE grade to a GCSE grade, from a level to a level, or anything like that. It's about how the knowledge that we've got in the curriculum fits with the other knowledge, whether it's cumulative or hierarchical, in order to know what we're teaching well, what we're teaching badly, and whether we're teaching it in the right order and it's the right stuff anyway. So our kind of curriculum quality assurance conversations are also curriculum development conversations. We spend a lot of time unpicking what progress looks like, as I said, across the years, scrutinising what our pupils' curriculum would look like across years and building those comprehensive curriculum maps. Actually, not long before we got the phone call at Elstow regarding the Ofsted there, and we weren't expecting it for a good 8 or 9 months later, we'd looked in detail at mathematics and we'd taken action, we'd done some training across the whole school, and we'd already seen some impact of that and knew about it because it had been the focus of our conversations each week. Before Ofsted came, we identified some reading programme issues, and when Ofsted noticed, we were able to say this is the action we're taking. In terms of the implementation question, I just think we run our schools and we're able to talk with fidelity about the subjects in our schools, then we're probably going to be doing okay. I think leaders do need to know the curriculum really well and the rationale behind it. Knowing this is what our systems enable. And so in our secondary school, where things didn't seem to be going so well, when subject leaders were frustrated or where questions were raised about our curriculum, we have the Director of Education and senior leaders who have been involved in curricular conversations week in, week out, who are able to step in and advise or support. This happened in reading, it happened in art, it happened in DT. And in fact, in our inspection in BFS, art wasn't supposed to be a deep dive, but after some questions over that area of the curriculum, art was seen on the second day at very, very short notice with no problem. We've always had curriculum as being our focus, and I don't know where I came up with this, but I said this sometime, and Christine Council has repeated it in a number of sessions, so it's become a Christine Council thing. I'm claiming credit back. I said it. If in some schools every meeting on data was replaced with a meeting on curriculum, I think those schools would have much better data. That's certainly how we run our school, and that's how we talk about the impact of our school as well. This is basically what we do in our trust. We report key performance indicators, what we think the outcomes are going to be, our attendance and our pupil mobility, but very, very little else. We don't report any internal data because effectively we know that teachers are humans, that teacher assessment is unreliable, even for the best teachers. We know the research on that, and so we don't bother with it. We pretty much go for those three things. We do report to parents the results of 2 examinations in a percentage that they get every year, and from that percentage what the average was for the year group, but we don't do anything more than that. It's a summary of where we think they are in the curriculum. We don't do loads of numbers or any of that stuff to try and label kids as to where they are on their journey, because we think that we're pretending to know more than we do via those numbers. The questions we seek to explore much more are about those ones there, particularly the one, how good is the curriculum? And we think that teaching and learning leads from that. How do we know, and what can we stop doing to make the school better is a crucial question for us. I wanted to put this in because it comes from a presentation that Samantha Baxter, the principal at Elstow, gave to some local school leaders, and she said, like, we just haven't ever done anything for Ofsted. This is just what we do. And I think that's important to reinforce what I'm saying. I think that if we're going to focus on intent, implementation, impact, counterintuitively we have to not focus on those things but focus on curricular development and subject specific curricular development if we can. Just in terms of our Ofsted inspections, so particularly the one at Elstow, these were the questions, the discussions that came up. We had reading, including phonics, maths and history. I should point out, and I don't think I was aware of this prior to the inspection, but it wasn't a particular surprise, that if a school is claiming that they want transition arrangements, our curriculum is in development and it'll be sorted out in a year or two's time, but see where we are up to now, and they kind of take that into account. They don't do that in maths and in reading or in primary schools, because of course the maths and reading curriculum should be well established already. So it's really important to kind of not rely on those transition arrangements, although we could have done so in history. You can see that those kind of questions that came out were crucially important. All of that we were able to answer pretty well because of our involvement in curriculum. This is the kind of discussions that went on, and I hope you can hear from our focus on curricular development that these things came out very, very well. They were kind of second nature to our colleagues. By far the most difficult thing I think to address in the idea of intent, implementation and impact is impact. And the reason for that is because, if I'm honest, I just think it's really hard. The answer is our kids learned a lot. The best proxy to know that they've learned a lot is in our secondary school GCSE results, probably in our primary school it's Key Stage 2 results, although even that's arguable. And so that proxy is about what they learned a few years ago, over the last few years. It isn't a great proxy for now, of course. And because Ofsted, I think correctly, don't look at internal data, I think because school leaders have played some games, some school leaders have played some games with internal data. I suspect it's also because internal data is just not accurate. Teacher assessment just isn't accurate. In terms of that, then I think we have a real difficulty in showing impact. And I think that for us, lots of that was about making sure that not even making sure, but just doing what we did to make sure that the inspectors understood that we know what our pupils know and don't know. I described to you earlier how we don't do any marking at Bedford Free School. We don't do any marking. We expect teachers to feed back on the curriculum. There's no preferred method of doing that feedback, and we don't check on that feedback. There's no verbal feedback stamps or any of that stuff. Like, the only evidence is that the pupil gets better at the subject in question. Now, that's a really high trust model. We do carry out, we are completely high trust. Our main method of QA on what the pupils have learned comes from teachers. And teachers are expected to have a mark book, and their mark book is expected to note down what they know about the kids. You can't keep, if you teach 150 pupils, you can't keep 150 pupils' progress or 150 pieces of knowledge about pupils, well, 150 times however many pieces of knowledge you're feeding back on in your head. So we expect you to keep a mark book. But how you keep that mark book is also up to you, because it will depend on your subject and your curriculum, and your curriculum and your subject are very very different. It's really important for us in terms of impact that our teachers know what their pupils know and what they don't know. And to do that, of course, you have to know the curriculum inside out, because you have to be able to say, this part of the curriculum everybody knows. I know that because I did this assessment and we did this and that showed me this thing. They did this question, they showed me this essay, I wrote it, whatever it might be. So how do we as teachers, as senior leaders, know that that's good? Well, we can't know for sure, but we do run a high trust model, and we expect teachers every week to talk about a group. Here you can see a spreadsheet, and this is our data-driven instruction. It came from the first chapter of Driven by Data by Paul Bambrick-Santoyo. We have adapted it to be our own system. It's been set up by our IT whiz, John Moore. And effectively, every teacher has a 10-minute conversation with their line manager every week. It might be about year 9 this week. And so you sit down for 10 minutes. We say, if it gets to 15 minutes, you stop, because we're not interested in going into huge detail. We trust you to have done that. But what we want to know is, what have the pupils done well in the last 5 weeks? What have they learnt? How do you know? What have they not learnt, or what went badly? And what are you going to do about it? Okay. And is there any support you need? And then we talk about your class. Like in your year 9 class, you've got 30 pupils. Has anybody done particularly badly? Have you got a real concern about them, and what is it? If you say that everybody's done particularly badly, that's fine. It means you know how your class are doing, and we can collectively do something about it. And we explicitly never use this for performance management purposes, because it will reduce the validity. So this spreadsheet you can see is from a year 9 science group. I picked it genuinely at random because you can see all of them on our spreadsheet. I made sure that I didn't have any pupil names on there and not enough information to identify the pupil. And what I've done there is I've just showed you, if you see where it says cycle tracker in the middle, there's some numbers with yellow and red on them. Okay, and you see there's been 3 cycles. So every 5 weeks, the year 9s have been spoken about. It too means I'm worried about that pupil. And here's what I'm doing about it. And there's some hidden cells there. It tells us what I'm doing about it. But I'm all right. I think I can deal with it. A 1 means I'm worried about this pupil. They haven't learned the curriculum and I need some help. I need SLT to help. And if you put a 1 in there, SLT's responsibility is to help. Somehow we've got to get that pupil learning, because we believe that all pupils are entitled to join the community of educated citizens. And in our case, all pupils take a language up to 16. It's a much harder GCSE, but we're not interested in the GCSE results. For the school, we're interested in the quality of the curriculum, because that's what will dictate that the pupil can join the community of educated citizens. And we think that a Latin-based language is a part of that. Really important. This is our form, effectively, of high trust quality assurance. It's really hard to get Ofsted to look at that, because we're saying it's not data, it's not numbers, but what we can do as a result is we have, during the Ofsted inspection, they triangulate all their evidence. So the teachers will get observed in their, they don't call it an observation, they call it a walkthrough or something like that. I can't remember the jargon that they use, but they walk through, they observe some pupils' books. They might take the same pupils and observe those pupils' books outside of the lesson. They might meet with those pupils, and by the way, they meet with the pupils in both inspections without an adult present, without a teacher present or a member of staff in the school. They will then see the teachers at the end of the day. But it isn't feedback. It's, why did you teach this? What were you going to teach next? What's, and so on. That pupil that I looked in their books, this, a proper, genuinely good conversation about the curriculum and the impact of the curriculum on those individuals, and they extrapolate from what they find out about the curriculum across the school. I think that DDI really helped us to be able to answer those questions, and for all teachers, regardless of who went down for the session at the end of the day, to be able to answer that really, really well. So DDI has been super important to us. I realise I've just spoken for quite a long time, and I haven't actually referred to the notes I'd prepared. I spoke about a number of other things, but I wanted to, so I'm happy to answer questions, and I'm happy to, finally, I've missed out so much, but also I'm not that bothered about how Ofsted inspections go. I'm interested in trusts and schools getting better curricula by working together, particularly in subject-specific communities. And so that's the stuff I want to work with people. And so please stay in touch with us if you're like-minded, particularly if you're interested in knowledge and how that comes to fruition. I think that's crucial that we continue the collaborative effort that we've had as a system during the kind of lockdown period and the coronavirus period. That's used as a stimulus to increase that, to accelerate that, because I think that curricular development on a bigger scale is really A, desirable, and B, will make a huge difference to our pupils. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Stuart. I just want to give you some background on that. Trying to cram in 3 hours worth of information into half an hour was no mean feat, and I think we just about did it. So an immense amount of information, and obviously a lot of things have just been touched on, and we can explore some of those now, but Stuart shared his details, so do feel free to contact him after these sessions if you've got any burning questions or you want to work together to actually improve that culture that we have within our schools. So what I'd like to do is just formally welcome Stuart to the E stage.
Hi.
Welcome, Stuart.
Thank you.
Brilliant presentation. As I said just now, so much to cram into such a small amount of time. And so hats off to you for managing to get some really vital points into that. Lots of questions that have come up. Lots of questions, and I think it's really good that you've had the experience of primary, secondary in terms of the different settings, and some of the questions kind of reflect that as well. It's really good to see that you're looking at it from a point of view of whichever setting you're in. Which questions did you want to start with?
I mean, there's a few that relate to each other, and thank you for your comments and thank you for all the questions. I realised that I was trying to type as we were going along to answer some, and I realised I haven't answered as many as I wanted to, and sometimes I misunderstood and sometimes the answers are a bit brief. But really early on there was a question about where do we stand on the Key Stage 2, Key Stage 3 debate, sorry, not Key Stage 2, Key Stage 3 debate, on the Key Stage 3, Key Stage 4 debate, and the kind of length of the time that is given to those two stages. And I think this is a question that's come up repeatedly, particularly when people have looked at Ofsted, because of the perception that Ofsted have a preferred model, that a shortened Key Stage 3 is not attractive, a lengthened Key Stage 4 is is not attractive, that actually that Key Stage 3 should be prioritised. Ofsted have said, and I think they're right, that they don't have a preferred model, but it is I think empirically true that schools that have a lengthened Key Stage 3 have a shortened Key Stage 3 have found it more difficult to argue their curricular model is fit for purpose, that the substance is there, and I think that's what I would have anticipated. The debate about whether to do a 2 or 3 year Key Stage 3 doesn't talk about the content, it doesn't talk about the length and the priority of individual subjects in that key stage, and so I would argue that that we find it hard to get into it, like it's a proxy for the debate. The length of it isn't important, it's the content that's in there, but actually it's really hard for me to anticipate that a languages curriculum, when we know that Key Stage 2 languages is really hard to deliver, pupils haven't come across, if they're following the national curriculum, languages at all prior to Key Stage 2, it's really hard to deliver something of substance in 2 years. If pupils do 2 years of French and that's their entire modern languages secondary education, feels to me to be likely to be insufficient to contribute, particularly in my schools, to our aim of them joining the community of educated citizens. If you only have 2 years of history taught 3 times a fortnight by a historian, that might be the entirety of history that pupil does, taught by a historian in their entire lives. To me, that's a massive impoverishment of the curriculum. And so where do I stand on the Key Stage 3, Key Stage 4 debate? If it was up to me, we'd have a 5-year Key Stage 3. Like they would have an entitlement to broad academic subjects for the entirety of the time we're at school, and the exams can look after themselves and so on. I think that's probably the way that I would go. And so we haven't shortened ever our Key Stage 3, understanding that it's really hard to cram in the variety of subjects that we want to. What we do try and do is make sure that it's subject specific. So I think that a 3-year Key Stage 3 that has history, geography and RE messed up together in a humanities mush, or a topic based, what I might talk about as being like impoverishing the credibility of the subject, like is far worse to me than a 2-year Key Stage 3 that treats history, geography and RE like the disciplines that they are, like the distinctive quest for truth that they are. And I think that that's where I kind of stand in that. And I think that that's what's important for us. The question that we ask our middle leaders is, we say, what is it that pupils are taking from your subject if they do not take a GCSE in it? And if you can't answer that without reference to the GCSE, then your subject probably shouldn't be on our curriculum. And I mean that about maths and English literature as well. Like, if you can't answer what it is that you're contributing to those pupils joining the community of educated citizens, then it probably isn't the right place in our curriculum. If you can answer that, you probably end up saying, I need more than 2 years to deliver it with fidelity and to be able to ensure that pupils have the knowledge that educated people take for granted. And I think that's the way to approach it and the way to discuss it. And that relates to a second question that I had, a really great question: how do we ensure that the arts and the humanities are valued? I hope that you've just heard me talk about the subject specificity of the humanities. I want to broaden that question. How do we make sure that a range of subjects are valued and that we stick to the kind of subject integrity? It's a really good question. The first thing is that we treat subject specialists like subject specialists. If somebody says to me, that won't work in my subject, my starting point is that they're probably right. Because they probably know more about their subject than we do. And even our teaching and learning protocols, where I adapted a document I borrowed from Michael Fordham, the 10th protocol says, break these protocols before you butcher your subject. And that's really important. So subject specialists are given the autonomy to say, this is what's right in my subject. In particular, I think people asked about creative subjects, and at Bedford Free School, you'll know that in Bedford there's some very, very good private schools, and people pay a lot of money to send their children to those private schools. I think that our pupils deserve exactly the same as the pupils who attend those private schools. And so one of the things we do is music for all. Everybody from years 7 to 9 learns a musical instrument at Bedford Free School. Everybody. Regardless. And I think that's really important that we say that music is valued, it's an academic subject, it's really important. I don't see distinctiveness between that as a creative subject. In fact, I think maths can be incredibly creative. It's really crucial. In art, what is the purpose of art? Now, people disagree on this. For me, I want pupils who attend our school to, when they're adults, to have the background knowledge to be able to attend art galleries and enjoy them. And if they don't have the background knowledge, you know how people walk into art galleries and like, this is dead boring, or they're around in 5 minutes and so on, but to actually enjoy them. So we teach them about history of art. We treat it very seriously, and we make sure that that's important. And finally, even broader than that, when we talk about PE and the purpose of PE and competitive sport and things like that, like, I think they're really important too. How do we give them their credibility? How do we promote them? Well, one of the things that I think is important to point out is that if you, for very many schools, for really understandable reasons, if you do extracurricular activities, after school clubs, PE clubs and so on, you get those who opt in, who are able to, often the advantaged pupils, those who have parents who can pick them up. We do all of our extracurricular activities timetabled during the school day. So it means that all of our pupils at Bedford Free School do 2 electives, we call them, every week. We extend the school day. Every member of staff takes part in putting them on. We do rowing on the river, through to journal writing, through to extended poetry and things like that. Like, we take it seriously, and we think it's important, so everybody does it. An outcome of that is, and I would challenge many schools to beat this, is that last year 96% of our pupils played for a school team competitively, despite the fact that Bedford Free School has no playing fields and is in a converted office block. I can't say how valued our subjects are beyond that. I think that we value those subjects because they're part of building up a young person into the sort of adult that we're contributing to. And I hope you haven't heard anything here about GCSE results, and I think that's important. The results look after themselves, but a quarter of our pupils take art at GCSE. Like, what are the 3/4 getting from their art education? And if the answer is they just didn't like it, well, that's not good enough. We've wasted time with them. We need to have an outcome from them. There are a few other subjects, a few other questions, unless there's any you want to direct my attention to.
I was going to say that there's a lot to do with the broadness of curriculum, and how do you, as a leader, how do you find time in your timetable. So I mean, that side of it, how do you find time to actually embed those things? And I think I'm going to half answer it for you, because the discussions that we'd had beforehand is actually, this isn't about checking a box off. This is actually building a school culture, looking at what your ethos, what do you want staff to say about your school, what do you want students to say about your school, and offering that broad range. And sometimes the fear is the buy-in from students and parents is that when you're offering things that you think are irrelevant in some people's eyes, how do you justify those? And I think you've kind of answered most of that in terms of...
But I think it is worth talking about opportunity cost. I think Adam asked a question about practical and vocational subjects, and I think it's fair to say that first of all, they're not the same thing, I don't think necessarily. We don't offer vocational subjects explicitly. I think there is a role for vocational subjects in in education. I just think that the best vocational subjects, i.e. preparing for work subjects, are English and mathematics, if I'm honest, and the broad academic subjects. I think they prepare kids to be adaptable for work in the future better than the narrowly focusing on this is what you're going to do for work. I think they can be trained for work when they're older and they're adults and they're smart people. But what I would say, so we don't offer any vocational subjects at Key Stage 4. Like, we do prioritise like broadly academic subjects that I've described, including the creative subjects. But even kind of practical subjects, or subjects that are seen as practical, design technology we offer, and everyone does it. My primitive understanding as a non-subject specialist in design technology is that it's an academic subject that's about precision and accuracy, and contributes that to, that's something that's really valuable for people for young people to take on as they move into adulthood. And so I think that's dead important. And there was a separate question about, I think Adam asked it again, about low retaining. He used the phrase low ability, and I don't make a distinction between them. I'm not really bothered about that to such an extent. But low retaining pupils, like, what about the academic language? And the first point to make is that I think that the insights of cognitive science on what we can hold in our heads are really important. We don't overload anybody's working memory. But the second is that when I say academic subjects, I don't mean confuse pupils with academic jargon. That's the skill of teachers, right? It's to break down their subject to the component parts in order to build them up to be able to perform as subject experts. But our novices need the component parts. And the third is that, but I wouldn't shy away from subject-specific vocabulary. My 4-year-old knows the phrase social distancing right now. He didn't know it 3 months ago, right? So like pupils can take on this, some certain vocabulary, as long as we're focused on making sure they learnt it. And of course, there's all sorts of other questions around there. There's a really interesting question that was asked from Anne Palmer.
Yes.
And I found, like, I want to be cautious about this, because it's really easy to get this wrong. And I come at this from a humble perspective of not particularly being like 100% confident about everything I'm saying. But when I talk about joining the community of educated citizens, I often reference Matthew Arnold's phrase, the first chief school inspector, to go back to our title, when he said that young people are entitled to know the best that's been thought and said. Currently, for me, like, there are clearly some gaps in some people's understanding of history. In fact, in the last few weeks, for me personally, I remember I put something out on Twitter which led to me buying about 6 books about how can I understand the history of America sufficiently so that I understand how we got into the situation of kind of significant racial conflict that we're in at the moment. And I think that that's relevant for historians to think about. Like, is that something we want all our pupils to understand? It probably is something we should be considering at the moment. That doesn't mean we need to knee-jerk react to everything that happens in the news in order to change our curriculum instantly. And of course, if we tweak our curriculum, the Waterways of Venice thing, we have to think about how it fits in all the way through. But I think we have to be really careful not to be tokenistic about it. Shakespeare told the brilliant stories. He doesn't need to be told through rap, right? Like you can just tell Shakespeare. He's survived for a long time without it, and it's a great story. And I think that more generally, those who are disadvantaged or the powerless in society, I go back to what broadly Gramsci said, which is that, like, the oppressed need to know about what the powerful know in order to overthrow the powerful. If we get obsessed with relevance, particularly for those who are most disadvantaged at home. And I know there's a kind of potential to stereotype those who are disadvantaged. That, you know, most disadvantaged families have parents who are hugely aspirational for them. But if we get obsessed with relevance, those who are most disadvantaged at home, those who don't bring the most cultural capital to school, those who have the parents, and this isn't necessarily disadvantaged families, but those who have the parents who don't necessarily take the same interest in them, we risk trapping them in the domain of their experience. And my view is that schools should take pupils beyond the domain of their experience to expose them to the beauty and richness of human life. And so that's super important to me. But I say that whole answer, I say humbly, because I'm open to debate on that. Like, that's a real good curricular question. Like, how do we respond to current events compared to where our curriculum was? I've got one more if I've got time.
You can just squeeze one in. Go on.
Good. So someone asked about COVID-19 and how we responding to that, and I thought it was a great question. The answer is that we're doing what we can, the same as every other school, but none of us are trained in how to teach online. Like, our curriculum isn't designed for online. So I've asked my staff to do what they can. What I've asked them to do in any time they have is to prioritise exactly the stuff we prioritised before, the curricular conversations, because curriculum is the great leveller, particularly for those pupils who are disadvantaged. And so if we're going to have a broad, academic, great curriculum that's world-class, the biggest problem for us is allowing subject specialists the time to debate their subject. Well, now we potentially have the time to do that. And so my view is that it's tragic that pupils might not be at school for 6 months at a time and so on. But when they come back, our curriculum has to be the best it's ever been, so they can have the best year they've ever had, the best few years they've ever had. That's the best chance of catching up to the extent that's possible. And I think that's super important. Really sorry that I haven't answered other questions, but I'm really happy to do so outside of here.
You have very kindly shared your email details and everything else. So if anybody's got any burning questions, especially about how do you develop the curriculums that you have to take the broadness of knowledge that you want to give your students, I think that, there'll probably be more pragmatic questions regarding how you've done it. And I think you revert to lots of different things that you've done within your schools. So you've got Stuart's email address. He's on Twitter, very visible on Twitter, and do go and pose those questions. Thank you so much for your time. So just finally, thank you so much, Stuart. It's been an eye-opener in terms of, it's been refreshing to see that our senior school leaders and the visions that they have within our schools and how they're trying to give the broadest possible education, and sometimes against the odds as well. So thank you so much for that, Stuart.
No worries, thank you.
Okay, right, that's another session of #LDeduchat over and done with. Crammed in hours and hours worth of information into this hour slot that we have in the morning. And again, as Stuart said, apologies for not answering all the questions. I don't think we were ever going to answer all the questions that were going to come through, but hopefully it's given you some food for thought, and perhaps pose those questions to the leaders within your schools and within your trusts as well, in terms of how are you broadening the curriculum, how are you bringing in diversity, how are you decolonising your curriculum, how are you making the curriculum engaging for all your students, whether they're whatever backgrounds they come from, and then how do you actually go ahead and implement that and make that change. Have those conversations within your schools, within your leaders, with your teams. That's the only way that actually the impact of all of these discussions can be observed. You've got to go back and have these discussions, and you've got to, as Stuart said all the way through his presentation, collaborate. This isn't about just your school. This is about your network of schools. This is about schools outside your immediate zones as well. See what good practice there is out there. So thank you so much for joining us today. And don't forget, the conversation is continuing on Twitter at Chiltern TSA. Make sure you follow us. The conversation looks quite lively on there, which is quite good. Use the hashtag LDeduchat so we can find your comments and your thoughts and your experiences regarding this. I shared the poll results with you. 2/3 of you, I think, are expecting an inspection whenever that situation resumes. So good luck with that. Hopefully you've got now time to actually start embedding some of the good practice that you've seen around you. Again, thank you so much. We really, really appreciate it. Brilliant turnout today. It's blown me away. And I just want to say how appreciative and how much we value your engagement with all our sessions. So thank you. This is me, Arv Cowshall, signing off for another session of #LDeduchat, Leadership Development and Education Online.